HYHA fan game series called The Return to Freddy's. In that video, I specifically mentioned that I wouldn't be covering the lore of the series, as it was too overcomplicated and downright stupid at times. So, today, I aim to give you a full story summary, as well as a comprehensive review. To do all that, I'll be reading the official novel of the Return to Freddy's series, named The Dreadful Truth. If you wish to skip this story reading / summary, a timestamp will be on the screen to go to the review and commentary section of this video. On March 25th of 1942, a secret Japanese government facility called the Gilbert Facility was developing a project to save people from a contagious super cancer. Sadly, there was no cure. However, in May of 1942, the idea to transfer souls to a mechanical body came up. After many tests, the machine had functioned as intended, though another possible antidote to the super cancer was developed, codenamed RAD-SLA. The antidote was never put into practice, as it was feared to make the super cancer worsen. On July 17th of 1943, the soul transferring machine was finished. Ally, the son of the facility's owner, received a strange phone call in September of 1943. An unsettling voice began to ask about the soul transferring machine and how much it would cost to buy it. Ally told the unsettling voice that it wasn't for sale. Little did Ally know, that unsettling voice was a man named Allison, a mafia boss in America. After being denied access to the machine, Allison was pissed and packed him and his henchmen's bags to take a trip to Japan. When the flight landed, Allison and his henchmen tracked down the Gilbert facility. First, they shut off all the lights. Allison and his henchmen raided the facility, at one point locking Ally in a room, then releasing toxic gases into the said room, slowly killing him. After the raid of the facility, Allison found a bottle that piqued his interest, labeled Code RAD-SLA. With side effects listed as itchy throat, lightheadedness, 90% immortality, and loss of sperm, Allison took the vial. After escaping the crime scene, Allison decided to drink half of the bottle. Back in America, Allison, now having a hold of the machine, wanted to make a quick and easy business. He decided to make a manufacturing facility for animatronics, named Fazbear Inc. Fazbear Inc.'s first restaurant, Goldie Paradiner, was a big success, and with that, employees needed to be hired to work there. One of those employees being a man named Gron, hired on October 19, 1943. Gron was a hard worker with a loving wife and 2 beautiful sons. For many obedient employees, they never roused Allison's anger, but for those that did, there are 2 chances you get. Break chance 1, and you get put behind a secret wall, into a life of slavery. Break chance 2, and you get put inside of a torture suit, a specially designed animatronic suit made to stab and mutilate their victims to death. Gron and his friend Vincent are suspicious of Allison, so much so that they stealthily follow Allison through a series of high-security passages until arriving at a staircase. Walking down, Gron and Vincent come upon a secret enslavement area. Watching workers get beaten and the abnormal worship of an animatronic called the torture device. After being heard and spotted by Allison, the duo quickly escape to floor 11, where they attempt to sabotage the machine that creates the torture suits. Little did they know, their attempt had made the machine more unstable and corrupted. Escaping further to floor 1, Allison is trapped in the facility by Gron and Vincent, and is thought to be dead. Though, Allison was still alive, and was still controlling the torturous beasts roaming the facility. Side note, on November 5th of 1943, 2 extra animatronic suits arrived at Goldie Paradiner, those being Golden Lockjaw and Golden Kitty Fazcat. One day, 3 employees at Fazbear Inc. went to floor 9 out of curiosity, as it was labeled off limits. The 3 opened the door to find 3 torture suits in the room: the Beast, Torture Buster, and Torture Saber, known as the Slaughter Crew. The room had been covered in blood and corpses. Turning away from the horrific sight, the 3 employees found Allison standing behind them, with a rusty pipe in his hands. beating the employees almost to death. Their last-ditch effort was to climb into the torture suits. Though this was a mistake, as the torture suits mutilated and killed them. Meanwhile, on December 23rd, Grahn was taking his family to Goldie Paradiner for an early Christmas celebration. Though, while getting his kids settled down in the car, another vehicle rammed into it. The family was severely injured and taken to the hospital. The one driving this car? None other than Allison. At the hospital, Grahn and his family were in hospital beds recovering when another doctor arrived into the room. This doctor was one of Allison's henchmen. The man, following orders, disconnected Grahn's wife from life support, killing her. After the tragic death of his wife, Grahn was distraught. His 2 sons were being negotiated with. The oldest son was sent to another foster family, while his oldest son stayed with his father. On December 24th, Grahn and his son went back home. Wanting to bring up the mood, Grahn allowed his son to open up Christmas presents. After a while, the son went to bed. Though, Grahn was not going to stay much longer. He wrote a note for his son and left. When the son woke up, he didn't know what to do alone. He began to hear voices in his head. As the son made it to the living room, the voices got louder and louder. When he saw a final unopened present. Meanwhile, Grahn goes to meet up with his pal Vincent at Goldie Paradiner. Grahn continues to hear whispers in his head, saying, After some drinks, Grahn begins hallucinating a little boy wearing a fedora and a blue shirt. The hallucination is Grahn's younger self. Grahn begins to follow the hallucination throughout the diner, leading him to the back room. After some back and forth, Grahn sees the golden Frankburt suit and the golden Kitty Fazcat suit. Grahn's hallucination then uses meat cleavers to hang himself on a wall. As Grahn moves closer and closer to the golden Lockjaw suit, the whispers in his head begin to grow louder. Grahn steps inside the suit. The torture suit activates, killing him. Vincent, hearing the commotion, peers into the back room to see Grahn's corpse in the suit. After a commotion breaks out among the staff, Vincent storms off to Grahn's house, where no one answers the door. After forcing himself in, Vincent sees a horrifying sight. Grahn's son, Charles, hangs from the ceiling with slit wrists. Time passes, and Goldie Paradiner shuts down. Though, on February 2nd of 1944, a new restaurant opened in its place, named Frankburt's Pizza, now using a revamped version of the golden suits seen previously. Though, a month later, due to poor sales and bad work conditions, Frankburt's Pizza shut down. Meanwhile, in Japan, the Gilbert facility was still working on the Save the Kids project. At the same time, however, the Gilbert facility was also working to revive their old boss, Ally. Though, when trying to revive him, he became violent and psychopathic. He became increasingly violent without any reason. The staff were unable to control Ally's revived self, so they locked him up with the other revived people. To keep the contained specimens in control, the Gilbert facility hired a night guard to survey the facility. This night guard, named Lloyd, was given several items to protect himself throughout his nights, one of those being a computer system to monitor any hacks that could be made on patient 20, 48, and 63. On Lloyd's first night, he settled into his travel pod night guard office and began to monitor the facility. At around 3 a.m., things began to seem off. Hearing a beeping noise from his computer, Lloyd saw that the facility was being hacked by a user named FBINC. Though Lloyd was unable to stop the hack, and with it, Patient 20 woke up from his slumber. Now awake, Patient 20 was on his way towards Lloyd's office. Meanwhile, in America, Allison has every intent to shut the Gilbert facility down. He tries to hack into the facility's systems to try to kill the night guard. If a night guard were to die in the facility, it would destroy the facility's reputation. Back in Japan, Lloyd tries desperately to hold back Patient 20, named Tai, from killing him. Lloyd tries to communicate with him, but to no avail. ultimately having to reboot Ty's systems. This reboot ends up locking out user FBINC from the system, though Allison doesn't like this one bit. In retaliation, he activates the facility's toxic gas system. As Lloyd scrambles to combat this, Allison also activates Patient 48 and Patient 63's systems, Coley and Sally respectively. After more back and forth between Allison and Lloyd, Allison gets access to a special test subject labeled Do Not Access. That test subject was Ally, the facility's owner, after a failed experiment to revive him. After being awoken, Ally's systems began to malfunction, in turn making him more and more aggressive. Charging through the halls and crawling through the vents, Ally made it to floor 1. Lloyd was paralyzed with fear, though filled with adrenaline. Lloyd fled to the underground train system. After a brief train ride, Lloyd arrived in the supply room. Grabbing a propane tank and a handgun, Lloyd sat waiting for the beast to enter the room. Just as things began to seem calm, Lloyd put the handgun in his pocket and began to leave. Ally suddenly pops out from one of the vents, jumping onto Lloyd and begins to beat Lloyd to the brink of death. In a last-ditch effort to kill Ally, Lloyd shoots the propane tanks, killing himself and Ally in the process. Allison, watching through the security cameras, sits chuckling at the thought of the brutal scene. A day later, many scientists saw the damages and the horrible scene, causing the facility to be shut down. All test subjects were shut down as well, and everything was coming along just as Allison planned. By September of 1985, a new restaurant run by Fazbear Inc. had opened, named Fredbear's Family Diner. The owner of this restaurant, none other than Vincent. The restaurant had many new characters to show off, the likes of Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, Foxy, Kitty Fazcat, Sugar the cat, Doug the dog, and of course, their famous puppet. Though they did have one more suit in the back, Frank Burt. Though, with great popularity came the need for a night guard. A man named Jefferson was chosen for the position, though he wasn't a very good night guard. Meanwhile, Allison was planning a trip to meet Jackson, Gron's other son taken to foster care. Even before Allison arrived, Jackson was worried about him and his son, Carson. Allison eventually arrived at Jackson's doorstep. Letting him in, Allison and Jackson began to chat. In Allison's own words,
"You and your family have left a mark in my life, and I'd like to return the favor."
Allison then pulled out a handgun and shot Jackson between the eyes. Jackson's son, Carson, was at school at the time. Arriving home a couple of hours later, Carson saw the bloody corpse of his father. The police later arrived, questioning Carson, and they began to feel sorry for him. Eventually, one of the neighbors offered to take care of Carson. Years passed, and in late September of 1987, Vincent caught wind of Jefferson's behavior on the job. Firing Jefferson later that day, Vincent sat in his office, though he began to hear whispers of a child. Seeing the same boy with a fedora and a light blue shirt, the child began to whisper,
"Come with me."
Leading Vincent to the parts and services room, the ghost child crawled into the Frank Burt suit. Vincent realized that it wasn't a ghost at all, but a child he'd put into the torture suit. But it was too late. The suit turned on, skewering the child, killing him. Feeling sadness and guilt, Vincent regained his composure and went back to his duties. Setting his employees to find someone to replace Jefferson, a man named Kotz walked in asking for a job. Hired and ready, Kotz worked his first night. At the same time, the Frank Burt suit awoke, along with the child's soul inside. The ghost child, known as the Lockjaw Child, began to roam around the restaurant. Possessing Bonnie, their animatronic awoke and began to move about. Kotz woke up from his nap and began to panic. As more animatronics began to move about, Kotz progressively got more and more stressed. Suddenly, the phone rang. Picking it up, Kotz answered, and a voice on the other end began to speak.
Hello? Hello? Hey, bud. Welcome to Fredbear's Family Diner. Allow me to introduce myself. I'm Allison.
Allison began to explain the situation, then hung up. The nights progressed. Kotz used his Freddy mask to defend himself, though the child's soul grew angrier and angrier. One night, Kotz found himself in a horrible situation. Almost all of the animatronics were attacking him. At 5:58 a.m., he threw on the Freddy mask, hoping for the best. The clock hit 6 a.m. The animatronics fell onto the floor. Kotz later resigned from the position. Vincent, seeing the scene left behind, knew what had happened. He later expanded the building, turning it into a new restaurant named Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. Two decades passed. Many restaurants opened and many of them closed. It was November of 2015, and the animatronics were transferred from an old Freddy Fazbear's Pizza to a new location. The new security guard, Mike, knew Vincent and was happy to take the job. Though the ghost child was still around, tired of the constant pain and suffering. Mike began to work his shifts. At around 2:30 a.m. on a specific day, Mike noticed the music box was empty. Still, it didn't arouse any suspicion. However, later in the night, the ghost child began placing bits of his soul into each of the animatronics, causing all of them to activate. In desperation and frustration, the ghost child began to make the animatronics rip themselves apart. As the days passed, Mike began to have nightmares about the ghost child and the animatronics. He considered quitting the job, though one night, Mike received a call from Vincent. Vincent sounded terrified. He began to describe his feelings of guilt from Grant's death, with the call cutting to static soon after. With that, Mike quit his job and abandoned any connection to the Fazbear name. Meanwhile, a few months later, a group of teenagers began to wonder if they could run a Fazbear establishment themselves. The three boys, Blake, Chun, and Wilson, all began to plan their new establishment. The weeks flew by. The boys all worked to find a building to put their establishment in. They found old animatronics to use, though they needed a fresh new idea to make the best attraction in town. Wilson ended up with the perfect idea, to make a fantasy land with rides and huge arcade cabinets. The idea was perfect, and the boys went home for the night, ready to start their new business, with Blake staying in the building as a night guard. As the hours passed in the night, Blake began to feel uneasy. After a while of playing on his phone, the battery died. As he looked for an outlet, he felt more and more uneasy. Hearing twisting and turning of gears, Blake assumed it was a prank by his friends. Though, as he walked around the building with a flashlight, a metal hand grabbed Blake's leg. The hand belonged to Bonnie. As Blake escaped Bonnie's grasp and ran to the security office, he encountered Kitty Fazcat. Kitty Fazcat lunged for Blake, though Blake slid under the animatronic legs and began to run for safety. Waking up on an office couch, Blake tells Wilson and Chun about his night, though they disregard it as a dream. They end up breaking the news that they found the original Frankbert animatronic, as well as Foxy, Chica, and Freddy. The next night, Blake was once again on night guard duty, though as he got comfortable in his office, he began to hear the stomping of animatronic feet heading for his office, locking the door and hiding under his table, waiting for 6 a.m. Though, unfortunately, the lights went out. As Blake sat, trying not to breathe, he could hear the animatronic feet hitting the cold, hard floor. The only other noise he could hear was the aggressive gargling of moist flesh and blood emanating from Frankbert. Luckily, Blake was able to stay hidden until 6 a.m. As his final night approached, Blake began to grow more and more worried. He didn't feel comfortable opening the restaurant to the public after what he had seen. His worries were proved true, as within only a few hours after opening, the Frankfurt animatronic hugged 6 children to death. The event was all over the news, and Fazbear Fantasyland became a laughingstock. With local governments shutting down all the facilities similar to it, the building was demolished, the animatronics along with it. The Frankfurt animatronic crumbled, and the ghost child was set free. Though, the prophecy continued. Allison was not dead yet. "15 years pass. It's August of 2030. Blake, Chun, and Wilson are all grown up. They're still good friends. They've grown a strong bond with another man named John, though, as all of them have their lives to get to, Wilson wishes he could try children's entertainment once again. While the other guys are hesitant, they end up giving in and try to restart their failed business. The men decide to venture out to an old TV studio that Fazbear Inc. used to own and use. They end up splitting up due to a deal with legal issues, leaving Blake to watch the building as night guard once again. After all the legal nonsense is taken care of, they decide to name their new establishment Freddy Fazzy Funtime. While Blake is staying as night guard, an animatronic sprung to life. Showbiz Frankbert began to speak. Along with Frankbert, Showbiz Kitty Fazcat awoke as well. As the animatronics began to talk, their speech began to distort and glitch into nightmarish gargles. Blake knew this wasn't good. He looked around his office and saw an emergency steam exhaust pipe to his right. As he continued to check the cameras, he saw a room that read Gilbert Facility. Suddenly, out of the room ran Fairy Tale Sally and Fairy Tale Coley. As they ran towards the office, Blake opened the steam exhaust valve, causing the animatronics to reset. Following this pattern, Blake survived the night. A few days later, Blake received a call from Wilson. Wilson explained that they had found an old animatronic, this being the golden Frankbert suit from Goldie Paradiner. As Wilson continued to explain the good news, Blake debated if this was even worth it. A few days later, Blake was still on night guard duty, though he began to hear the noise he'd never heard before. A man was screaming in the building. Blake began to investigate the noise. As Blake searched for the source of the noise, sounds of metal screeching and scraping filled his head. Blake ended up walking back to his office, only to hear the screaming man yell. Peering out of his office, assuming it was a drunk man, Blake saw it, Golden Frankbert, drenched in blood and organs. As Blake stared at the horrid figure, the figure stared back. After a moment of silence, Golden Frankbert screamed. Blake didn't have time to think, he was already cornered in his office. In a swift motion, Golden Frankbert grabbed Blake and the Golden Kitty Fazcat suit, shoving Blake inside the old suit. The torture mechanism activated, draining Blake of all blood and life. Realizing that Blake was not Allison, Gron, inhabiting the Golden Frankbert suit, left the building in search of Allison. The next day, Wilson, John, and Chun saw the carnage left. They mourned the death of their friend and called the police. The investigator assigned to this case, Carson, Gron's grandson. Years passed and the investigation continued. The chief investigator, Carson, had found the last remnant of Fazbear Inc. within a small rip-off location called Frankbert's. Carson, along with the police squad, raided the building, killing every last one of the criminal gang members inside. With it, Allison is finally killed. The prophecy is fulfilled. Wow, that was a lot to unpack. To be honest though, going into this, I didn't have high expectations. Who can blame me though? With a game series full of unfulfilled promises, shoddy coding and model work, and an overall lack of care, I fully expected this story to be horrible. Though, to my surprise, it wasn't that bad. Plot-wise, I think the story had some actual depth in the way it was connected. From the initial incident with the Gilbert facility, all the way up to Freddy Fazzy Funtime. I honestly think it was tied together really well. Much of the overall plot and some of the plot points did leave me feeling impacted, whether it was the intense chase through the Gilbert facility with Ally, or the anxiety-inducing night shifts with Blake. On a separate note, however, the finer details of the plot aren't as refined. Many of the details within the story aren't necessary or are just flat out no good, such as the super cancer or even the ghost child. Hell, the ending with Carson and the police raid feels really anticlimactic, as it only happens within the span of 3 or 4 sentences in the actual book. For being the main antagonist for the majority of the book, to me, Allison doesn't get the proper finale he deserves. More elaboration to the life of Carson would have also greatly helped in the reinforcing of this. Giving an actual point of view to the character would have greatly benefited to the impact of the finale. I also have to mention that the constant use of time skips throughout the story can lead to a very mixed pace. While some areas of the story can feel lightning fast, some other sections can drag for many chapters at a time. Another important factor that I've yet to mention is the fact that I painstakingly summarized the story in my own words, and that my summary is not representative of any grammatical mistakes within the original book. Within the original book, there are so many grammatical mistakes. If I showed this story to a grammar app, it would probably end itself trying to fix it all. Though, this can be most likely chalked up to the book's author and the game's creator, Tyler, being homeschooled, as some rumors have stated, so he isn't really the sharpest tool in the shed. With all of that being said, the story pleasantly surprised me. While the inclusion of some finer details was unnecessary, and the writing style and grammar were made by an amateur writer, I think that if someone was willing to clean the story of its rougher edges and fix many of the pacing issues within it, I think the story could be quite good for independent animation, or even film. Overall, it was decent, though nothing to write home about. Come to think of it, Allison's demise in the final story seems a little too sudden.
Baba Booey.
It feels as if it was meant to be expanded upon, and, well, it was, at least for a while. To clear up some confusion, I initially thought that The Road That Falls had little to no connection with the rest of the franchise, and that it was an entirely new endeavor that Tyler wanted to make. Both of these, however, were wrong. As seen from the images on screen, there are quite a few connections to the rest of the series. For starters, the biggest and most obvious connection, the Nightmare Lockjaw animatronic, is seen here in concept art from Tyler's Instagram. Also see the torture device in this timeline, with many similar design elements. While I won't knock these two for their designs, they're trying very hard to be grotesque and shocking, in a similar vein to Resident Evil's Nemesis or Mr. X. Another large connection is this character right here. That's Allison. Apparently, by the end of the Return to Freddy's Desolation, there would have been a choice for the player to make. One option saw Carson, the player, kill Allison by ripping his head off, fulfilling the prophecy once and for all. Or another option where Carson doesn't kill Allison, leading to Allison escaping into a machine designed to send him to an alternate reality. That alternate reality is supposedly where The Road That Falls was meant to take place. Though take all of this with a grain of salt, as the Return to Freddy's Desolation is argued whether it's canon or not to the timeline. Just some food for thought. Also, while we're still on this topic, here are some other miscellaneous pictures and tidbits from Tyler's social media. We can see more images of the Dear Wendigo thing. We can also see some of Tyler's more enthusiastic ideas, such as aliens being involved with the story, or the fact that this game was planned to release on the PlayStation of all things. Though, even after all of this, if you look at many of the remake/rebuilt projects that people are making, many of them credit Tyler within their credits. He's still avidly working on new projects, and honestly, I can respect that. Even when the world knocked him down, he got right back up. Finally, I want to thank all of you for the absolutely explosive response to the first video. I honestly expected that first video to get maybe 100 views at max, and you all blew that out of the water. It was amazing and honestly breathtaking to see that many people actually care about this stupid franchise like I did. If you go look at the comments of that original video, I responded to as many as I could. People telling me facts about the series, people correcting me on certain details, or even just the people that started discussions and made conversations. It's great to see, and I gotta thank all of you. I also really want to thank people like Daco, IULITM, the people behind the Return to Freddy's and the Return to Freddy's 2 Rebuilt, as well as the people behind the Return to Freddy's 2 Winter Wonderland. All of you guys were integral to getting that video as many views as it did. I've linked all these dudes in the description, so if you want to check them out. I'd also like to thank Alama Girl on Twitter, there's her handle, for successfully messaging me for 3 hours straight about the Return to Freddy's. I thought no one could be a bigger nerd about this franchise than me, but I was proven very wrong. In all seriousness, go check them out. They're working on a lot of cool projects that you all might enjoy. Along with that, it's absolutely insane that I started writing that original video at around 12 subscribers, and now with the time of writing and recording this, I'm at 300. I honestly can't thank you guys enough. If you want to check out some of my other videos, you're more than welcome to. Make sure to subscribe. Have a good day, and take care.